Hello, my wonderful third graders. We are in lesson 2 of the Viking Age. I hope you're enjoying learning about the Vikings. This lesson is called Home of the Vikings. Some words you will hear throughout the read aloud: anvil, a heavy iron block on which heated, softened metals are hammered into different shapes. The blacksmith placed the hot piece of metal onto the anvil and began to hammer it into a sword. Counsel is advice and guidance. Gruff means harsh and low or rough. Gruff. When Mr. Cho spoke to us in a gruff tone, we knew he was in a grumpy mood. Gruff. Reliable, trustworthy, and dependable. Tucker had many reliable friends who were always there when he needed them. Treacherous, very dangerous. Yoku would not cross the high treacherous bridge because it was old and rotting. So for the rest of this unit, this domain, we're going to learn about the Vikings through a fictional narrative or story. The narrator of this story is a 13-year-old boy named Bjorn. There are other characters in the story whose names may sound a little different from the ones that you're used to hearing. That's because the story's characters would have spoken Old Norse, an ancient Scandinavian language. Which present-day countries make up Scandinavia? Look at the map. Look for Scandinavia. Present-day countries are Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. All right. The setting of this story is Norway, and as you can see right here, there's Norway in Scandinavia. It's in northern Scandinavia. Bjorn lives in a small town with the rest of his large family. At that time, Bjorn might have called himself either a Norwegian, a person from Norway, or a Norse boy, but he would not have called himself a Viking. The only people called Vikings were the warriors who went on raids. Part of the setting of a narrative is the time period in which the story takes place. This story takes place long ago, around AD 900. Who can tell me, do you remember what AD means? It means Anno Domini, which means year of our Lord, right? So it's after Jesus, okay? The way the author chooses to have the narrator tell the story is called point of view. Bjorn is telling his own story using pronouns like I, me, my, our, and mine. Is the story written in the first person or third person point of view? That's right, first person. He's the one telling the story. In this narration, the first person narrator, Bjorn, is also a character. When you listen to The Wind in the Willows, from what point of view was that story told? Do you remember? That was a long time ago. Third person, right? It was someone outside the story that was narrating the story. It wasn't Mr. Toad, it wasn't Mole or Water Rat or Badger. It wasn't any of the characters in the story. It was someone outside the story that knew the details. From what point of view was the narrative of Samuel, Jack, and the children told in the light and sound domain? Do you remember? Was it Sam, Jack, or any of the children that told the story? No, it was third person, right? These two narrations, the third person narrator was not a character in the stories. So this story involves Bjorn growing up as a young Norse boy. Some stories involve a theme called coming of age. Remember, a theme is what? Like a message that you get from the story. Like in The Wind in the Willows, we got a message of friendship, loyalty. Well, this one is about coming of age, which means growing up. Growing up is not always an easy process. So coming of age stories can involve tough situations and sad emotions. The expectations for what a girl and a boy would do as part of growing up during the Viking Age were different. Boys, for example, might have been expected to travel on raids or become apprentices, farmers, or fishermen, whereas girls might assume more responsibility in household chores. Both would have been expected to marry very young, often by the age of 13. It's really young to get married. Have you ever read a story that makes it easy to imagine the scene the author is describing? Things such as rich vocabulary and dialogue among characters can help the reader imagine what is taking place in the story. When an author describes a scene through sight, smell, sound, and or touch, it helps to bring a story to life. So listen for the vocabulary and descriptions that bring Bjorn's narrative to life. Here we go. For several days rain had fallen heavily upon the ground. It would appear that Freyr, the god of fertility, had finally listened to our request for rain. The farmers who lived on the outskirts of our small town had already sown the seeds for the spring crops, and now the rain would help them grow. After so many days of rain, the thatched roofs that covered our homes were heavy with moisture. The raindrops created ripples in the hundreds of muddy puddles that were now unavoidable in the narrow streets. Despite the rain, the streets were still busy. People were either going to or coming from the marketplaces. Some skilled craftspeople sold their wares from right outside their homes. So this is what a thatched roof would look like. This is what Bjorn's roof of his house probably looked like. Made of natural materials like hay or leaves. I stood in the doorway and looked out at the hustle and bustle of my town. I watched as smoke from the hearths of other houses rose up into the gray sky. I caught the aroma of meat being roasted for the evening meals. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my father as he worked. I saw him raise a hammer high into the air and then bring it down onto a piece of burning hot iron that lay upon the anvil. As the town's master blacksmith, my father was valued and known for making beautiful, strong, reliable items out of metal, such as swords, jewelry, and keys. He was admired for his physical strength and wise counsel. It was because of him I suddenly realized that I knew almost all the families in our town, but until this very moment had not realized how much I would miss them. "Bjorn, what are you doing? Come here and help me," came the sound of my father's booming voice. So a hearth is a part of a fireplace. For the people of the Viking Age, the hearth was an important place because the fire provided light, let them make hot meals, and warmed the house. And here's a picture of an anvil that a blacksmith would use to bend metal. They'd get the metal really, really hot, and they'd put it on the anvil and they'd hammer it so it would bend into whatever shape they wanted. He had obviously spotted me standing in the doorway. "Yes, father," I replied as I hurried to his side. I'd been working as my father's apprentice for almost 3 years. My father worked in a forge made of wood and thatch, similar to our own home. His forge was always filled with smoke, dust, and flickering flame, not to mention the sound of constant hammering. So a forge is a blacksmith's workshop. As soon as I stepped into his forge, father handed me the bellows and put me to work. "Strengthen the fire, Bjorn. I have work to do," he instructed me. I immediately began to use the bellows and watched as a flow of air fueled the flames. The more I pumped the bellows, the more the flames flickered. As the air shot into the flames, they became more intense. My father was making a number of axe heads, chisels, and nails. He explained to me that these tools would be needed when I reached Iceland. So it sounds like Bjorn's going somewhere. "Father, why do so many of our people leave home and travel to faraway places?" I asked as I watched him heat pieces of metal in the flame. "As you know, Bjorn, Odin has blessed our homeland with many things. We have an ocean that helps to feed us. We have rivers and forests. Even our rugged highlands are very beautiful. Odin has shown us how to build the best ships in the world and how to sail them. Even in the darkest night, we can look up at the stars and find our way across the most treacherous oceans. Bjorn, it is necessary for us to seek new lands. We are a mighty people." Our warriors are known as mighty Vikings. When our warriors sail across the North Sea to conquer new lands, people tremble at the very sight of our longships, he explained. Sometimes the people who leave never come back, I replied, trying hard not to look at him. These are changing times, my son. There is much conflict in our homeland now. For many, it is best that they leave and not return. Bjorn, you are almost 13 years of age. You are almost a man now. Soon you will take a wife, and if Tyr desires it, you will be a Viking warrior. The assembly members have decided that you and many young men will establish homes in a new land. It is our way, my son, he said firmly. To take a wife was the language used in this time for marrying a woman. It was common for people to marry at young ages long ago. Why do you think they married young? It's mostly because they didn't live as long as people live now, so they had to marry young. I did not reply. Instead, I continued to fuel the fire and watch as my father heated, twisted, and shaped pieces of iron into an array of objects. He would frequently explain to me what he was doing. Like many other Norse, my father was an expert blacksmith. My father was such a skillful blacksmith, however, that he had once been accused of employing the dwarves who dwell in the deep underground reaches of the earth to make the fine weapons and tools that he produced. He had laughed aloud at this accusation and exclaimed that if anyone could find these dwarves in his forge, they could pay them instead of him. Several times he let me work with pieces of molten metal. These were the best times, the times when my father taught me the skills that his father had taught him. I just wish there was a way that I could stay in my homeland with my people. Outside the forge, daylight was disappearing and twilight was creeping in. Eventually, as the light faded, my father looked up from his work and put his tools away. "Time to eat," he said in a gruff voice. But then he ruffled my hair. "Let's go see what your grandmother has cooked for us tonight," he continued. "I already know what it is," I replied. "I helped catch it." "It's hare stew," I said, laughing. Then, with his arm around my shoulders, my father and I began to walk toward our home, tempted by the smell of cooking. What kind of animal is a hare? That's right, it's a mammal and it looks similar to a rabbit. "You are now old enough, and tomorrow I will begin to make your sword," my father said. "You are honored, Bjorn. Very few carls own a sword. It is a gift from Lord Toki to you. You must name it wisely." "I know that, father. You saved Lord Toki's life, and that is why I am being given this honor. The sword really belongs to you," I said, all the while staring at my feet. Similar to the ancient Roman society, the Viking people's society consisted of different orders or groups. The Carol's were like the Roman plebeians. They were the biggest group who worked many different types of jobs. The elite, like the Roman patricians, were the jarls. The slaves were called thralls. So we have the jarls are the rich, the carls are the regular people, and the thralls were the slaves. "I have a sword. It is the sword my father gave to me," he said proudly. "You will give this sword to your first son and tell him the story of where it came from and why you have it. This is how we record our history. Now let me go and eat some hare stew." And with that, we entered our home and took our places around the hearth with the rest of our family members. What do you think will happen next? You will find out when we read the next part of this adventure tomorrow. What's going to happen to Bjorn? Is he going to have to leave? What's he going to do with his sword? Is he going to get married? Who knows? Find out next time. What examples did you hear in today's story that signaled Bjorn is coming of age or growing up? He will marry soon. He might become a warrior. He helps his father in the forge and at the anvil. His father will make him a sword and he will travel to Iceland. Why is Bjorn going to Iceland? To escape the conflict going on in his homeland. You heard 3 different Norse gods mentioned in today's story: Freyr, Tyr, and Odin. Can you remember what each was the god of? Freyr was the god of fertility, Tyr was the god of war, and Odin, father of the gods. Does this information tell us that the Viking people worshipped one god or that they worshipped many gods? They worshipped many gods, which meant that they were polytheistic. Why were the Vikings called Norsemen? The name meaning northern men. The name was given to them from people in England and Europe living south of Scandinavia, so they would have thought of them as coming from the north. What job were many Viking age men, including Bjorn's father, skilled at doing? Being blacksmiths. Bjorn's father makes reliable and strong swords. Why do you think a sword would be important to the Vikings? They need swords for raids, passing down from father to son, to defend their homeland. What adjectives or phrases would you use to describe Bjorn's father? Use part of the story to explain your answer. So he was strong, wise, reliable, proud to be a blacksmith, good at giving counsel, speaks in a gruff voice. Do you think Bjorn's father is upset with Bjorn when he uses his gruff voice? That's just the tone and manner of Bjorn's father. Perhaps his bark is worse than his bite. Or maybe Bjorn's dad is trying to hide how much he's going to miss Bjorn. Bjorn's father says that their people can find their way through the most treacherous or dangerous of oceans. How did Vikings do this? They had the best longships and knew how to sail them. They used the stars to guide them. As with the Romans, there were 3 main orders or groups of Viking people. One order was the Jarls. Which ancient Roman group was like the Jarls? The elite patricians. Another order was the Carls. What ancient Roman group was similar to the Carls? The plebeians. Which group does Bjorn and his father belong to? They're part of the Carls. The last order was the thralls. What ancient Roman group was similar to the thralls? Slaves. What are some things that were different about growing up during the time of the Vikings compared to growing up today? What kinds of things about growing up are the same for Bjorn as they are for you? Compare and contrast your growing up to Bjorn's growing up. Our word for today is reliable. In the read aloud you heard, as a town's master blacksmith, my father was valued and known for making beautiful, strong, reliable items out of metal, such as swords, jewelry, and keys. Say the word reliable with me. If something or someone is reliable, it or she or he is dependable or trustworthy. Georgia has always been a reliable person because she is always there for anyone who needs help. Have you ever known someone who is reliable? Who was it? All right, so we're going to do a making choices activity. I'm going to say a sentence that includes a person or a thing. If the person or thing in the sentence is reliable, you're going to choose that is reliable, or she or he is reliable. If the person or thing is, the sentence is not reliable, say that is not reliable, or he or she is not reliable. A friend who always is good, or who's a good friend. You would say, or a good listener, you would say he or she is reliable. A clock that keeps perfect time. That is also reliable. A doctor who is often late. He or she would not be reliable. The sun rising in the morning. That's reliable. It always happens, right? A person who does not tell the truth would not be reliable. So point of view. So we talked about narrator, right? The narrator of this story is Bjorn. He's the one telling it. And we know that it's his point of view because of the pronouns that are used. So let's look at this little clip, or this part of the story that we've read and talk about what makes it good. All right, what helps us with the narration? We have narration and we have dialogue. It says, I continued to fuel the fire and watch my father work. He was such a skillful blacksmith. These were the best of times, the times where my father taught me the skills that his father had taught him. I wished that I could stay in my homeland. My father looked up from his work. He put his tools away. Time to eat, he said in a gruff voice. I helped to catch it. It's hare stew, I said, laughing. Then, with his arm around my shoulders, we walked back towards our home. So we know our point of view is first person, it's a character in the story, because Bjorn is talking, and we know that because it says my father, me, I wished I could, my homeland, my father. And it's not inside the dialogue. All right, that's part of the narration. Then we have the dialogue, which we can tell because the dialogue has quotations, right? You can see the quotation marks around time to eat, and I helped to catch it. It's hare stew. So that tells me that a character in the story is talking. We have Bjorn and his father talking to each other. So we know it is first person point of view. Okay. Good job, third graders. So the last thing I want you to do is you're going to write a sentence using first point of view. So you're going to write a sentence and you're going to use first point of view. You're going to first person point of view pronouns in that sentence. It can be a sentence about anything. Just make sure it is first person point of view. Good job, third graders. I hope you enjoyed learning about the Norse people and our new friend Bjorn.